Hi, it's Carolyn Friedlander, and welcome to week 4 of the Alphabet and Shirts Quilt Along. It's week 4, which I cannot believe. That means we are more than halfway through this quilt along, and I want to know how you're getting along. Are things kind of going how you expected them to? Are you making good progress? Are you feeling good about your project? Are you feeling motivated? Are there things that you are discovering that you didn't anticipate, good or bad? What else? I'm kind of curious to know where you're at, so let me know below. As for me, I do feel like I've gotten into a nice rhythm with things, and the quilt along is holding me accountable. So I have to say that I am very grateful for that. It's motivating to see all of your projects, but then it's also really motivating knowing that I need to make a post and that I need to share and that I want to end up with some finished projects by the end of this. So the things that I outlined in the beginning, those are things that I want to have done. So it's been nice to kind of reevaluate that each week, reevaluate my progress, and take a look at the things I haven't done, things that I may not be feeling like doing, and getting them done. This is definitely a week for that. So this week is a perfect example because I finished the quilt top for my twin-sized alphabet quilt. This is a project that I had the blocks pieced because I made them sort of at the same time I was doing the workshop for that class and that project. And so the blocks were like done, they were sewn together. I just needed to add 4 borders. Borders, but for whatever reason, that was my hang up. It was stalling out the project. And so this was the week that I was like, you know what, we are at the halfway part. I need to actually make some progress on that. So I was like, just sew on the borders. And I did, and that feels really good. And I think it had kind of gotten to be a little bit of a mental hang up. So just kind of getting over that has really opened up my motivation for that project again, and I'm very excited to get it quilted. So I added the borders, and they are really large borders. So I thought this week I'd share more about just borders and my favorite tips for adding borders. So I'll share that in a few minutes. Otherwise, let's see. So on the motivation front, I think I am staying motivated. And I think that, so one, adding those borders and finishing that quilt top that was kind of, I don't know, that was turning into a project that easily could have sat I have racks where I hang my quilt tops and in progress stuff. And I could easily see that quilt hanging there kind of indefinitely. So I am really glad to have avoided that. So that's motivating, getting over that hump. But I also think that focusing on 2 different projects in this quilt along, having a little bit of a variety of projects that I am making, I think that is keeping me motivated, and it's allowing me to kind of hop around a little bit, which feels good. It feels good to have different options depending on what I'm feeling like doing. It is important to also have some guidelines, some goals to kind of keep me some structure to the goals, to kind of keep me in line with that. So I don't know, I'm feeling pretty good about that balance. Yeah, I know that sometimes it might feel like it's definitely good sometimes to focus on one project at a time and see it through. But I think for this quilt along, for me especially, I've really enjoyed having a little bit of a variety. So I don't know, let me know what you're thinking. Are you feeling the same way? Or maybe you focused on just one project, or I don't know, I'm seeing some of your projects, you're merging worlds, which I love. I love to see that. Where you have some alphabet stuff going on with shirts, or maybe alphabet's going on with another type of project. I don't know, I think that's really cool. So I see some project hopping and merging going on in your worlds too. Something else that I think has been helpful for me this week, not only having different types of projects, or a couple of different types of projects, but projects at different stages. So sometimes it's really nice to feel creative and to be picking out new colors and auditioning things, but sometimes it's also beneficial to have projects that just have some mindless steps that need to be done, because you may not always be in the mental space to be wanting to reinvent the wheel or really push yourself with color or kind of figure out that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's nice just to settle into something that just requires some actual sewing. You just need to do the work. And I think the twin-sized quilt that was good for me. I was like, it was a very straightforward thing that I needed to do. I needed to add 4 borders. I knew what size they needed to be. I knew what fabric I was using. And so that was a really good reminder for me that that type of not just project, but like step in a project, it's nice to have that. As far as new discoveries, this week I had this funny thought about how Alphabet has made me think about letters and words differently in kind of our language, and kind of in a similar, not exactly the same, but made me think about words and letters in a different way, sort of like the game Wordle. So I don't know if any of you play Wordle, which is you guess a 5-letter word. You've got 6 guesses to guess this word. It's on the New York Times app or website, and it kind of became very popular the last few years, but I do play it daily, and in playing that game, it's made me think about which letters are popular or which letters are helpful, because you're guessing a word. So it's definitely, I don't know, it's made me think about that stuff in different ways. And so this week I had just a few words that I was really feeling and kind of motivated by. It was just kind of a thought, and I was like, you know what, I want to piece some of those words. So I pulled out my letters and was cutting out the letters for those words. And as I was flipping through each of the pages, I was like, are there any A's? Are there any B's? I was like, this is a really good sort of mental challenge to go through the alphabet like that and go through your words like that. And that's why it made me think of Wordle, that it's just kind of turned the alphabet into, I don't know, it's shown a new light on it. And I liked that. So it's kind of just a silly little thing, but that was an interesting discovery that I made this week. So as far as updates this week, like I mentioned, I pieced together the quilt. I finished piecing together the quilt top for my niece. So next I'm gonna quilt it. So I've got thoughts going on about how I want to quilt it. And then in shirts news, I have been continuing to make shirts that represent the outfits I've made. Let's see, I don't know if you can see, there are a couple back there that I've done this week. I don't know, I think both of these are really fun. One of them represents this jumpsuit that I made out of astronaut fabric, I don't know, a year or two ago. Anyway, I love that outfit. I didn't make that jumpsuit thinking that it would be a serious thing that I would wear after just making it, but I really like it. So it's reminding me yet again that I want to make another jumpsuit, not out of necessarily wild fabric, but just want to wear it. It's a nice thing to wear over the summer. And then the other shirt is kind of a fun one made with a Liberty print. So things that I haven't, that one is not a shirt that I wore last year. So I've been incorporating new wardrobe items in blocks this week, and that has felt good. And then also, so this week I've made a couple of new blocks for my wedding. And like I said, this Quilt Along, I really wanted to do some commemorative blocks to celebrate things that I made for my wedding last month. And so these 2 blocks are from our actual wedding outfits. So this one is from, to represent my dress. So I have, the dress was made from a kind of ivory satin. And so that's here. And then the trim is made from a muslin that I used to test the fit for Bobby's shirt. I made him a shirt. And then the background is the fabric I used for Bobby's shirt. And so this is for Bobby, and the shirt is made from the shirt fabric that I made for the wedding. And it's a special fabric because it's from my Friedlander collection, and this print in particular was a drawing based on like an aerial view of my parents' ranch. And we got married at my parents' ranch, so it was definitely thoughtful on a lot of levels. And very cool that I was able to make him a shirt. I was able to make him a shirt, but I was able to make him a shirt made from a fabric that represents where we actually got married. And so that was really special. The trim is navy, and that's because he wore a navy vest and pants. And then the background fabric is from my dress fabric. So I kind of like how these both feel very bridal to me. They're very white and cream. But but I like how they kind of make a nice little set. And so yeah, that was fun. So those were kind of like the biggest wedding ones that I wanted to make. But there are a few others that I want to make too, just capturing some of the other details. So I still have those on the agenda before the end of this quilt along. So those are in my mind. All right, so let's talk about next week. Next week, the plan is to talk about quilting and finishing. So if you have any questions about that, you can leave them below, or you can submit them in my Q&A form, which is also linked below, so that I can make sure to address them next week. But before then, I would actually like to quilt my twin-sized quilt. I have some ideas in mind, and we'll see. That would be a nice goal, to get it quilted before next week. That way I can also, and I'll share with you the different ideas I've had for quilting it, and we'll see what I actually end up with. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna end up with. I'm sure, like most things, that'll just be what I'm feeling at the time when I go to actually do it. As for shirts goals, I'm gonna continue to make blocks for the things I'm wearing. I might go ahead and make one for this outfit. The more I look at my blocks and how they're accumulating back there, I keep thinking that I wanna sew the blocks I'm making this year into another chunk of blocks that I'll sew to the blocks that I made last year. And then I think maybe just give it big borders around the outside and use it as a throw size quilt. That's kind of what I'm thinking, because I don't know, it's such a meaningful, well, especially now with the wedding quilts, but also all of the things I've made, all of the outfits that I love wearing, I just think it'll be a special quilt. So that's what I'm thinking about with that. But the plan for next week is just to continue making shirts. That's the plan. All right, so I have some border tips for you. Since I added borders to my twin-sized quilt, it got me thinking about that, and I thought I'd just share some tips. So first of all, with that project, it has some pretty big borders. And I love adding big borders for a couple of reasons. One, it adds a lot of, it fills out a space faster. That's not the main reason, but that is, on a practical level, it's really helpful if you do, and especially like I just mentioned with my shirts block, if the blocks only make kind of this weird little size, that would make a great wall hanging, but I want to like be able to use the quilt as like a lap quilt or a throw or something like that. That's a really easy and fast way to make it big enough for whatever size you want to use it for. So in practical sense, big borders can be pretty helpful. They can be an efficient way to achieve a larger sized quilt. Visually and aesthetically, I love how a spacious border can give space to the design and allow you to, it gives your eye a bit of a resting space. So especially like with the alphabet quilt, there's a lot going on with the letters. They're all different colors, they're all different shapes. And I love that having, a simple border like that really helps. It doesn't compete with everything in the center. So then it just like helps push the emphasis to the pieced section. The outside is just this restful space that you can your eye can just kind of relax as it then meanders back to the beautiful piecing and all of the different things to look there. It's also, like in this case with the twin-size quilt for my niece, all of the blocks are very multicolored, which is fun. But her favorite color is purple. So using these big borders with purple, it definitely shifts the color balance of that project way over to her favorite palette, which is purple. So I hope that makes her enjoy it more because I customized the color for her. And by the way, the color I used is Kona Corsage. But when you're adding borders, adding borders in general, I know can be a tricky thing. I used to quilt for other people, and one thing that seemed fairly consistent was that people seemed to have, I felt like people had a hard time keeping borders flat and in sewing in your borders. That's the easiest place. You're kind of working your way to the outside, and it's very easy for those borders to become ripply and unflap or stretched out or whatever. So it created a lot. It created it really motivated me to focus on borders, and I care very much about having flat borders. When I'm piecing them, I'm very careful with my borders. And so I do have a few tips that I wanted to share. So first of all, I should say with large borders like this, you could piece together different sections. You might need to piece together different sections depending on the size border that you need to add. But You also might decide to improv some of those pieces. So a lot of my patterns do have large borders on them. I just think it's a great opportunity for practical reasons, but also aesthetic reasons. But know that you can create a solid border, or you can improv it or piece it somehow specifically. So that's kind of a design detail that you can figure out. It's an opportunity. But when you are going to do your borders, here are some tips. So when it comes to fabric, there are different properties because it is a woven material. You're gonna get, more stretch on the bias, so that diagonal direction on your fabric, you're gonna get a lot of stretch with that. You're gonna get the least amount of stretch in the direction along the selvage. It can be really helpful to cut your borders lengthwise to take advantage of the direction that's gonna stretch the least. And that also happened to work out in a practical sense for these very long borders. So first, I worked with my fabric in the direction that it's going to be the most stable. And then instead of using my rotary cutter to cut the borders, first of all, these are really large borders, so measuring out like an 80-something length is a little bit of a nuisance. So what I did instead was I took out my yardage, laid it more than the length that I needed, and I snipped the fabric and then ripped it the first direction. When you rip fabric, the benefit of that is that you are now working with the fabric on grain. So it is going straight. So I cut I cut my fabric from the bolt, I snipped it, ripped it, got myself on grain. And then now I cut a snip going in the next direction so that I can get a right angle. So I actually snipped to remove the selvage. And then I measured out the depth of the border, the thickness, and snipped and ripped. So for all of those pieces, I snipped and ripped so that I made sure that I was on grain and making square pieces. And then I pressed it. I pressed those borders so that they were nice and clean and flat. And when I am adding a border, I like having, so my pieced top, what I've done so far, will be on top. And then I have my border, that flat fabric, on the bottom. So that's how I like to layer it, rather than the other way around. I don't know why. I find that I just feel like it feeds through the machine more evenly. I think I don't really know why, but the feed dogs pulling that flat fabric more evenly helps keep it nice and flat. It just feeds it through more evenly. And so I'll also pin. I use pins to pin the border in place, and that helps. And then I end up squaring everything off at the end. After pressing it, I pressed all my seams open, and that seems to work. So my tips are to pay very close attention to your fabric grain. Don't be afraid to snip and then rip your fabric to make sure that you are on grain. So with your border fabric underneath your pieced design, and then use pins. Use pins to make sure everything's getting evenly distributed across the top of your quilt. I hope that those tips help. All right, so now I have some questions from you. Let's see. So we've got Linda. She asked, any tips on working with different substrates in the shirt pattern? I wouldn't mind creating one with my wedding dress fabrics from a few years ago. I love that. Yay. So that was inspiring. I was like, I'm going to get my wedding blocks done. A few episodes ago, I mentioned a little bit about working. I did talk a little bit about working with garment fabrics, and the one type of garment fabric I avoid with shirts, or I am choosing to avoid with shirts, are knit fabrics, just because I don't want to have to deal with that stress. And it's just, they're so different than a woven that using them for this type of, it's not something I want to get into. So pretty much anything other than that is up for grabs in my world. So a woven fabric is up for grabs. With my blocks this week, I used a satin, which I'd already sewn with, and so I kind of knew how that behaves. But the really nice thing about foundation paper piecing is that you're sewing onto the paper foundation, so that really helps stabilize your fabric. So if you're using something that does have a drapey quality to it, or if it's thinner or it's thicker, the paper really helps equalize those differences and keeps everything nice and stable. Here you can see I used the satin as the shirt, and then here I used the same satin as the background. I like it better in the shirt because everything's kind of secured on all sides. This one will be nicer once I sew the blocks together, just because they're not stretchy or anything. They don't want to be as crisp on their own until they're like kind of locked in place, if that makes any sense. So yeah, that works great. There's also a pretty big variety in like this. The shirting fabric is like cotton lawn, so it's very fine. The satin is much thicker. And when you're paper piecing, it really kind of doesn't matter. I find that, again, the paper is helping balance out those differences, but you do want to keep that in mind. So especially on the shirt for Bobby, where I'm using the cotton lawn that's really thin and fine, and it's light, and then using this dark color, I was really careful with my seam allowances and making sure that the dark fabric never extended past the lighter one. So the lighter one, I might even cover more of a seam allowance. Something else is this muslin that I used for the trim. I've actually used this muslin in another block. Yeah, I used it as a background for another block. It's got a really cool texture, but it's also very thin. So, it's maybe not ideal for patchwork, but it's something that I really wanted to incorporate. And when it's on the paper foundation, I don't have any problems with it. But when I go to the next steps and think about taking off the paper and piecing it, I'm just gonna make sure that, one, I make sure to clean up behind it so there are no loose threads or anything showing through such a fine fabric that's kind of a little bit see-through. And then I'm also gonna take that into consideration with my batting choice. I generally use a very light batting. I actually really like using polyester lately from Quilter's Dream, which is basically white, so that'll be fine. But if you are using like a more natural colored, unbleached cotton or something like that, just pay attention to the color and how that might look under a really fine fabric. That would be something else that you want to consider. And then also just take into account your quilting. If it's a fabric that needs to be secured in some special way. Another thing that I was thinking about, Linda, with bridal fabrics or like other specialty things, like laces are so often used for, gowns and like other things. I think I didn't use any kind of laces in any of my outfits, but that could be really pretty to use that in your shirt block. And in that case, I would layer it with something else. And you could try, these pieces are all pretty small, so I think you may not need to worry about fusing it to anything. But you could play around with how you kind of join those fabrics together so that they don't shift too much depending on how you're going to use them. But I think using a lace or even a tulle or something else, it could be really neat. If it's something that's too fussy, maybe like some other elements, you could always bring it in as an applique later, or just get creative. I don't know. I think there's a lot that you could do. But yeah, so I hope that helps. And I guess as I did with Bobby's, like I didn't have fabric for his pants or vest, but I just kind of replicated that color. So if there is a fabric that's harder to, or impossible to use the actual fabric, maybe you don't want to cut up your bridal gown, which makes sense. If you didn't make your gown and don't have scraps, get something that like represents it in some way, whether it's color or texture or whatever. You can make those substitutions, and I think it can still be really meaningful and cool. All right, so our next question is from Victoria, and she asked, the small table on wheels you use in some of your videos, can you say how you use it and brand? I need better organization and you have it nailed. Oh, well, thank you for thinking that. Yeah, there are definitely some things I've figured out, but I am always up for hearing what everyone else is using too, and kind of scoping out other people's sewing setups. And especially, oh my gosh, especially at sewing retreats, that's the best place to see what kind of tricks people are using for storage and organization. I always come away from a retreat with some ideas of different things that I need to pick up for my own sewing space. So that's one tip, is pay attention to your friends, what they're using. As for me, mentioned a small table on wheels. I don't have any on wheels, so I'm not sure what that is. I think maybe it looked like there are wheels because I have tables that I can move around my studio. That's really important to me. And one thing that I use a lot in some of my videos, I have two small tables. There's one Very simple folding table. It's a plastic folding table. I'll try to find a link and put it below. And it is, I mean, it's sitting right here. It's probably like 18 by 24. And it's just the perfect size to slide up next to you if you need a little support for a big quilt top or something when you're sewing on those final seams. So that's a handy one that is always next. I mean, it's like right next to me right now. But another one that's really been handy over the last few years is just a simple white top. It's a tabletop from IKEA. And I'll have to take a measurement and I'll put a link for that below on what the actual size is. It's a little bit bigger than this table that's next to me. So it's probably like 27 by maybe 40 inches, maybe 36. And it's just a plain white top. And it being just plain white actually comes in handy. I shoot a lot of photos on it. It's just a very clean background. And then I just have some of the legs, the basic legs that you can buy at IKEA. I have some of the adjustable sets. Those are nice. You can adjust, really personalize the height where you use it. And then on both of these tables, I put little felt pads on them. So that makes it easy to slide them different places that I need. That makes it a little more mobile. So just like they make little felt fabric pad, they have a little adhesive on one side and you stick those to your legs of your table. And then you can move stuff around. So those are both really handy, but I'll put some more thought into other good storage ideas if that's something of interest, and maybe I'll do another special video. I don't know. Let me know what you think. But all that stuff is helpful. It's always helpful to see what people are using and sharing that kind of information. So I am happy to do that. So thank you for your questions. If you have a question to answer that you'd like for me to answer for next week, you can leave it either down below, or I have a link to a Google form that you can fill out and I'll get that as well. So anyway, I am loving seeing your projects. Continue to tag me and you can post using the hashtag CFAlphabet and CF Shirts of Shirts. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again next week.